So welcome to Timely Topics. Today's kind of course is a little bit about Charlie Kirk. A lot of people have kind of shared they'd never heard of the guy until recently. If you're not plugged into the college campus scenes or TikTok or things you may not know, but people have kind of shared, well, they've heard a lot about him. People who are praising him, people who are deriding him. So trying to understand, well, what is this all about? Why such fervor? So we'll kind of talk a little bit about him, his past, things he said, not in a sense of trying to define the legacy, define it as good or bad, but to kind of see and understand more of what people are thinking on both sides. So I took articles from different newspapers and media outlets that would be considered more like mainstream objective. That might be some slightly right-leaning, some slightly left-leaning, to kind of get people's interpretation so you can kind of read both supporters and critics in their own words often. And we'll kind of look at the larger context of things as well to kind of put it into perspective so we can kind of try to understand things in a way of things aren't always so crystal clear, black and white. That often, as you say, our experience is what kind of guides our understanding of things, our opinions on things. Our values, our worldviews affect how we see something. For instance, many Americans would say Samuel Adams is a patriot. Others from other parts of the world would say he's a terrorist. Martin McGuinness in Ireland, who David Latimer befriended. Some could never get over this guy was a terrorist leader. He's always a terrorist. Others see him as a hero who fought for civil rights and did what he had to do to give rights to his people. Some got on David Latimer for befriending him, saying, how can you do this? If your son was killed by somebody that Martin gave the thumbs up to, your opinion is going to be colored largely by that experience. So you can have one person have very different people having ideas about, depending on where you stand, what your needs are, what your cultures are, what your beliefs are. And you'll see the same thing about figures in America, left, right, everywhere in between. People are going to come at it with different viewpoints, and there isn't necessarily one right viewpoint. So I want to start with this kind of quote that Charlie Kirk says. He said at one point, if I die, I want to be remembered for my courage and my faith. Kind of an interesting statement, right? That you want to be remembered for your courage and faith. So on one side, that can be really good, right? You want to be known for someone who is a faithful person, that you had conviction in. We can name lots of people who we can lift up as heroes of ours or heroes of the faith that could have said something like that. They want to be known for their conviction of faith. On the flip side, we can also probably name some people we would see as zealots or terrorists who also would have said, I want to be known for my conviction in my faith. Whether it's Islamic terrorism or Christian terrorism, or someone who wasn't necessarily a terrorist, but you might see as well, this person really did some damage, all based on faith. And there are people, wow, this person really did some good things based on faith. We were talking about in our youth group this morning about religions and how religions can be a really good thing. And sometimes religions can be a really bad thing. And it's not one religion's good, one religion's bad. Things happen in all religions that are great, that have done so many great gifts to the world and cause damage to the world. And sometimes, depending on where you stand on it, one can cause good for you, that same action can cause bad for someone else. So that's why we're kind of talking about at the beginning. You can read it later. It's kind of a history of what happened on September 10th. But a little bit about his past. So Kirk's political ascent began when he was just basically 18. He decided, in his own words, I had the crazy and wild ideas. I was driving home from Rockford, Illinois. I wanted to try to start a youth organization to try and save Western civilization. So, moderate goal. No high, lofty ideals and challenges there. So here's somebody who says, I want to make a difference. Now, when you use the word Western civilization, that's also narrowly defining something. Then how you define Western civilization? We can ask people here, what is Western civilization? You're going to get some different answers about that as well. Sometimes, though, that's used as a code word for basically white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture, that I'm going to protect this above all else. Good or bad, you can decide people want to uplift, save their understanding of the world. And sometimes we do that and we say, yes, this person's great for this. You're helping preserve something important. Others will say, by doing that, you're eradicating something else. And there are all kinds of issues in history we can go through that deal with that back and forth. But that was his goal, to save Western civilization. Do you understand the motivation? From this audacious vision, Kirk built a movement that would, over the next decade, become a pretty dominant force on college campuses. So if you've been outside the college scene, you may not have been very familiar with him. But by the mid-2010s, this Turning Point USA wasn't just a grassroots movement. They had hundreds of chapters across the country in different colleges. So Nicole Hemmer, a political historian at Vanderbilt, said his primary role is as an organizer. He was someone who immediately went to college campuses as a teenager and saw his role as, how do we get these students to identify as conservatives, and how do we get them engaged in politics? And he excelled at that role. He was a really good organizer. His debates with students, often live streamed, became viral moments in conservative media. He thrived in confrontation, branding himself as the warrior standing against woke culture. So you can have somebody who says, okay, here is my position, I'm very clear on my position, and draws people in. Now, something to note. So Charlie Kirk didn't go to college. Again, at 18, he wanted to start this movement. So that's an interesting kind of tension point in culture itself. So he didn't get the larger liberal arts understanding of how to communicate these issues, the larger pictures of political science and religion. He didn't have the formal training in a lot of things he talked about, whether it's constitutional law, culture, anthropology, sociology, Christianity. And that's been a divide throughout hundreds of years on whether you need this kind of classical education to be able to talk effectively and teach effectively about something. If you remember from last year here at Derry, we talked about that very controversy in the history of Derry Church with the old and the new side church split. The old side said, we need ministers who go to seminary, who are trained in certain things, who can read Hebrew and Greek, be able to read the scriptures for themselves, make those determinations, who get trained in the larger idea of ministry. And in the new side, he said, maybe we don't need that. There isn't enough ministers to go around. Can they just get a basic training and go through that? Do they have to have all of this intellectual side? It becomes this kind of intellectualism versus anti-intellectualism. And in the history of the church, during that Great Awakening movement, you had some kind of what might be considered good things happen. Because of that, more people maybe got brought into churches and everything. On the flip side, some would say more people went into churches, but those churches went further astray from Orthodox Christianity and didn't always have the best understandings of the gospel. Others would say, hey, these people who weren't classically trained, they were able to bring new ideas and new perspectives on things and kind of connect in a way other people didn't. So Derry went new side for a while with a pastor named John Roan, and eventually the churches got back together. But that's kind of the history of the world in a sense of, do people need to be trained in these things or not? Sometimes people who aren't trained can bring new ideas and goodness. Sometimes they can bring damage. And it often depends on your perspective. Do you want a surgeon who's never went to surgical college before? Maybe, maybe not. But in a pinch, if somebody's watched some YouTube videos, would you rather have that or nothing? I don't know. There's different ideas there. But it's important to know that he didn't have that larger kind of training on these interdisciplinary things, but he still spoke with authority on it. And then you can decide whether he was correct or incorrect on some of what he said. But he wasn't trained at any one college or anything, didn't have a mentor who kind of taught him. Because often we have people, like Supreme Court justices, right? They often then, clerked and learned from other Supreme Court justices. You can kind of see the pattern. NFL coaches, what do we talk about? The coaching tree of Belichick, of Andy Reid. You can kind of see how it goes. Didn't have those different professors. So Julian Pierce was a member of Turning Point for more than a decade, said Kirk would be remembered for giving young conservatives in America confidence to be themselves. It said it used to be that for young people it was cool to be a Democrat, but he made it cool to be a Trump supporter and to wear the MAGA hat and live your life with traditional family values. And again, that's a word, traditional family values. What does that mean? You can talk to different people, and they can mean different things. In certain aspects and areas, you say that people know exactly what you mean by traditional family values. I've joked here about, how often a Christian radio will have, biblical family values. I'm like, have you read the Bible? Biblical family values are pretty messed up. Because most biblical families are like tricking each other into having sex with them, raping each other, stealing from each other, tricking each other, and murdering each other. I do not want my family to look too much like the biblical family. It's messed up. But what is traditional, right? What is traditional music? We have an idea of it, but is traditional music Gregorian chant? That was tradition for a long time. Is it only things written in the 60s? Is it the 15th century music? Or is it traditional to have modern music because that's what your church has known for the last 20 years and you've only been around 20 years? What is traditional kind of depends on what you think is tradition. What's traditional in the South at Christmas may be different than what's traditional in the North at Christmas. It's traditional in the Midwest to put carrots in Jell-O salad. That to me feels like a crime against humanity, right? But others are like, that's what you do. So we use these phrases, but not everybody's on the same page. And that can sometimes become a challenge where we have these disagreements. This page. So he kind of started more libertarian, but evolved in his thinking like most of us do, right? None of us have just had these like one stream, for the most part, ideas about faith, politics, anything else. We grow, we evolve. So initially kind of emphasized libertarian themes, limited government, free markets, but eventually kind of embraced the populist nationalist ethos of Donald Trump's movement. So his turning points became more and more aligned with the kind of MAGA agenda of the way things are. So by 2019, he was hosting President Trump at an event. It was kind of a testament to Kirk's influence. He said, only in America is a story like that possible, and only thanks to the blessing of the Lord. His came over a friend of Donald Trump Jr., and even Trump himself would praise Kirk at rallies. He became a key part of this kind of growing conservative populism movement. Also, they raised a whole lot of money, and that kind of fueled more growth. He was kind of a good communicator in the sense of communicating the agenda and the aims of the Make America Great Again movement on college campuses. So it kind of distinguished him from other right-wing activists because he took the fight into what he would consider conventionally hostile environments, onto college campuses where almost any college, right, you're going to have a lot. You have young Republicans, young Democrats, all these different things. But for whatever reason, the stereotype is that many kind of major universities are more liberal in their understanding of the world. You can explain that for a lot of different ways. Not going to get into all of that. But for a lot of conservatives, they would see that as hostile territory, and Kirk would go in there to debate and have these conversations and try to get people more aligned with himself. He was very good at it. And so people would flock to all these different rallies and everything. But he kind of said, when you pierce the liberal echo chamber, minds are changed. Millions of them, he said. The campus left is threatened by debate, dialogue, discussion, and differing ideas. So in some ways, he's stereotyping all the time. And that's one of the things he did is like, I'm going to call this left, this right, whatever. People do that. Left activists characterize whole groups, whether that's certain kinds of colleges, certain kinds of schools, certain kinds of churches. What he did say is very true, I think. Overall, college campuses since 2015 have been threatened by debate, dialogue, and discussion of differing ideas. Now, this is true of both what may be considered liberal colleges or conservative colleges. There's a book by Jonathan Haidt. We read his The Righteous Mind a few months ago. He wrote a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. And he kind of talks about, you had this phenomenon in 2015 where universities that might align themselves or people assign them alignments start not wanting to have these larger discussions. They would cancel people coming in that would say things that would make people feel bad or disrupt. So conservative colleges, like, you can't have that person come in, they're too liberal. And what would be considered liberal college would say, you can't have this conservative activist come in, they're too conservative, they'll disrupt things. You start seeing all these larger higher education schools kind of circling the wagons and not letting outside voices come in too much. And Haidt and these others kind of say this is a problem for higher education, because in higher education you want to have a diverse place. So you want to have any voices allowed in the marketplace of ideas. So where Kirk says it's just the liberals, it wasn't. Conservative schools and public schools were doing the same things. Whatever school board was in control, they try to say, you can't have that book. You can't have this. Both left and right, since 2015, are really censoring the ideas. And so there is a need to kind of pierce through that on all sides. But his was a voice that divided. People loved him, people hated him. His rapid rise was not without controversy. You can look it up for yourself, finds all kinds of things. Always be careful where you look, though, because people are going to take quotes out of context, make them seem the worst possible, and people are going to take quotes out of context and make them see as good as possible. Or they're going to try to explain it away and say, they didn't really mean this. We say that a lot. Like, well, this political leader said this, but he was just joking. It's kind of like you can say anything you want, but say bless your heart, and it's okay. Bless his heart, he's just dumb as a doornail. It's okay to say that if you say bless your heart. To say, I'm kidding. There was a show, what was it? Somebody, maybe it was like an alien or something, who was kind of learning, you can be really mean if you just say I'm kidding afterwards, because you think that makes it okay. But we try to we twist things around and make things seem really, really bad or totally fine. So you have to be careful where you're watching, and try, as always, read as much or watch as much of the larger context so you can make up your own mind. Now, I can't go into the larger context of every single quote in here. That would take us forever. But if you find something you're like, that seems weird, go try to read the speech, watch the video, get the larger context. So his critics would point out his amplification of conspiracy theories and misinformation. He repeatedly cast doubt on the legitimacy of the 2020 election and embraced claims about voting machine manipulation. After President Trump's loss to Biden, Kirk demanded answers about 100% ballot drops in Michigan, questioned Dominion's voting systems, and how you believe on that. Courts have ruled Dominion's fine. People who Giuliani just had to pay a bunch for the defamation suit against them, whatever. He also described the civil rights passage of the Civil Rights Act as a mistake and spread falsehoods about COVID-19, sparking condemnations from even conservatives who once supported him. For many, these positions crossed the line from provocative to dangerous. Now, on the civil rights passage being a mistake, if you look at the larger context, he doesn't say anything like, black people shouldn't be allowed to eat with white people or anything like that. So don't jump to that conclusion of, this group of people deserve inequality. If you read, it's more about how the passage of civil rights that, in his mind, leads to future abuses where others are discriminated against because of affirmative action and DEI. Now, you can have a lot more conversation and thoughts about how those things work, were they needed, how long they were needed, is this trying to equal the playing field or not? That's a different subject. But it's not about, he didn't say, black people don't deserve to go to good schools or anything like that. So you hear that at first, you can make that seem really, really bad. He's talking about more, at least, these other things. Now, that itself, though, is problematic, how you define DEI and those things that happened in the 60s or not. But in that same line of thinking, the way he argues it, you could easily say the revolution was a mistake because it led to things like continued slavery, Jim Crow, the prioritization of white supremacy, which would be equally as true based on that line of thinking, both being logical fallacies and bad arguments. Shouldn't do either one of them. So comments from Kirk on race and crime prompted angry liberal backlash on numerous occasions. 2020 called George Floyd, the man who was murdered at the hands of Minneapolis police, a scumbag. While discussing crime on his podcast in 2023, he said, "Prowling blacks go around for fun to go target white people." Referring to his opposition on affirmative action and hiring practice to boost diversity, he said in the same podcast, "If I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified." He pointed out specific black women and said, these people are dumb, they just took white people's jobs. Now, it's not every black woman, specific ones. Now, you can go and look at those particular women and decide whether they qualified or not. I'm not going to make that judgment for you. But he purposely said very provocative things that he knew would get outrage. And why? Because we are in, as Tim Moses talked about a lot in his issues class, we're in kind of an attention economy. The way to get attention is to say things that are going to spark outrage at first. We have headlines that are clickbait, like, if you have this one thing in your house, you're probably going to die tomorrow. And we're like, oh my gosh, what is it? I better click on this. And then the article is something stupid. We want to kind of have the most provocative things possible to get attention. And that works left and right. We say things that are going to purposely stir up heavy emotions. And it works because we allow it to work. Until as a people, we stop wanting the outrage culture, the provocation, people are going to keep doing that on both sides and say things that are going to spark controversy and sometimes make some people feel bad because it draws attention. And politicians do it, media news outlets do it, Facebook does it, memes do it. It's that how many of us kind of read a headline, don't read the article, but assume something horrible because we read the headline. But if you actually read the whole article, the article's a lot more nuanced than the headline. So what a lot of these left and right influencers do, they'll say some big thing, and then they'll kind of walk it back a little bit and be more nuanced. But the only thing that really gets out there is that one crazy thing, but that's done on purpose. Left, right influence, this is how it's working in this Instagram world. Kirk would often cite his Christian faith when explaining his positions on issues including Islam, gender, abortion. He said, "The West is best because of Christianity. We must seek Christ first, and our national and cultural resurgence will immediately naturally follow. For America to be great, we must remain majority Christian." So you can decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Throughout history, theocracies of any kind, whether it's Christian, Islam, Hinduism, bad things happen. This has been a great example when one religion kind of leads the way based on that religion. It's never turned out well in history. But again, it's your decision on where does faith play a role in politics? What is your culture? What does your culture want to look like? Do you value a diverse culture of lots of religions? Or does that become really sticky and difficult, and it's actually better to have kind of more of a homogenous culture? You can see examples of good and bad around the world and how that's gone well and how that's gone badly for it. He was also accused of anti-Semitism, but most people have been at some point, when he said on his podcast that Jewish communities have been pushing the exact kind of hatred against whites that they claim to want people to stop using against them. He added, "It is true that some of the largest financiers of left-wing anti-white causes have been Jewish Americans." So, maybe true, maybe not, I don't know. But he would be accused of anti-Semitism for those kind of things. Also, to understand, it's easy to get accused of anti-Semitism. If you speak against Israel as a nation and their policies, you get accused of anti-Semitism. It's one of those logical fallacies I think now, and I'd probably get in trouble for saying this, but you get thrown out as anti-Semitic and it stops conversation. And you can't have any more. So, he might be pushing the envelope and again overly generalizing, which is one of the logical fallacies we talked about. But there is also, like with anything, there are Christians who can be really bad. There are Jews who can be really bad. There is Muslims who can be really bad, who want only certain things, who play both sides of the thing. I want this for myself, not for them. It happens across the board, liberal, conservative, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Muslim, we all do it. So often opponents would take something sad and then highlight that as the worst thing ever because you're trying to discredit people. He would do the same thing, though, to left people. It goes back and forth all the time. Kirk's stance on gay and transgender rights were particularly polarizing for folks. He opposed same-sex marriage and argued against gender care for transgender people, often citing his Christian faith on these issues. He said, I believe marriage is one man and one woman in 2019. He also said, though, that gay people should be welcome in the conservative movement. As Christians, we are called to love everybody. But then last month, Kirk, who vocally opposed Pride Month and celebrations, attracted criticism for writing, it should be legal to burn a rainbow or Black Lives Matter flag in public. Technically, it is legal to burn those things in public. It's still legal to burn an American flag in public. As of the last Supreme Court case in the 90s, there's another one coming up because they still want to make that illegal again. But at the moment, it's legal to burn any flag you want to in public. So that is legal. One of the kind of gay rights activists said that Kirk was the loudest homophobe in America. His words caused immense harm to LGBTQ plus people. Referring to one podcast, he said, this is more than political theater. It was a dangerous real-world assault on LGBTQ plus safety and dignity. On the flip side, Kirk would say he's trying to protect other people from some of the abuses of that community. So, where's the truth? And it kind of depends on where you stand on some of those larger issues. He was also an ardent defender of his evangelical Christianity. He was one of the main people who really helped me be bold about my Christian faith, said Savannah Stone, who would describe herself as a trad wife. She said, feminism has really hurt the nuclear family and has hurt women, adding that she's been heavily criticizing for talking openly about her belief, and that Kirk kind of helped her kind of give more critique to feminism. Now, that's one of those difficult things where feminism as a whole has a whole spectrum. At its heart, if you go to look at the basics of feminism, feminism is about choice. So if you're a woman, you want to have a trad wife role and stay home with kids and let your husband take the lead, feminism says if you want that, great, knock yourself out. You have the right to do that. If you want to not get married, not have kids, and be a CEO, feminism says, great, that's your choice, do that. But as with any kind of movement, there become these branches that say real feminists only are trad wives. Real feminists are only people who work outside the home. And then trying to then work through all the muck that comes when we co-opt terms becomes difficult. For Presbyterians, people hear the word predestination. And we think this difficult thing of, well, God chose some people to go to heaven and some people to go to hell. And trying to convince people outside the church that's not really what it's about is hard because that's how it's been co-opted for so long. We try to teach something differently here, but with any ism, you can have several different iterations of that. So there are iterations of feminism that kind of make it seem if you choose this, you're a bad woman. And there's other iterations that say if you chose that, you're a bad woman. And that's not helpful for anyone. There was activist Chandler Trump who said, when we were young black leaders wearing MAGA hats, Kirk said, it doesn't matter if you're black or white. He said political figures tended to speak down to us, but Kirk did not. He paid attention to us. That's why young people listened to him. But another girl kind of said, I wanted to just watch more of his videos, see if I misjudged him. So I looked again on YouTube. And she said, but I found the way he talks to people in a debate is not opening up any genuine discussion, especially when he debates with a woman. He tends to talk very fast and talk over them, which is kind of typical for these kind of like anybody who's doing a show like this. Anybody listen to like sports radio ever, any kind of talk radio? I can't stand when a caller comes on, because a caller may have a point, but then whoever the radio host is can cut them off and then just talk and not allow the counterpoints. So it always bothers me because it's not a real discussion half the time. So I can't listen when they get into the caller thing, because it aggravates me every time. They're not really having the real discussion. That's what happens with people like this who are having these kind of mock debates, so to speak. Left people do it, right people do it, because they want to actually control the conversation, because that's their purpose, to kind of lead things in a certain direction. That's why they're doing all of this. You had a lot of people, both liberal and conservative, though, kind of really saying this, though, is you can't have people committing political violence. There was a guy named Benji Backer, who's a conservative climate activist who had once considered Kirk a mentor. And he said, when he was younger, I was getting death threats from my own high school colleagues because of my political activism. And Kirk was really supportive. He was really the only person that stood up for me at the time and just reminded me to always stay resilient and to stay strong. But he also said, I didn't agree with him on a lot of things. We drifted apart in recent years, but I always had so much respect for the strength he had, the courage that he had to stand up for what he believed in, even if I didn't always agree. So Becker said, I can think something is vile when someone says it's vile, but not think that they deserve to be killed over it. He was a good person deep down, and we had a very, very adamant disagreements on a lot of things, including climate change, but at the end of the day, he's a human that deserves to live. So Kirk lived a life in a way that he knew even that being so out front and vocal can cause risk. Anybody that speaks their truth with conviction is at risk, right? And we see in the history of the world, whether it's Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or JFK or Gandhi or Charlie Kirk, if you are very much out there and you take a stand on something, there's a good chance you're going to alienate somebody who doesn't agree with you. And that can become dangerous in this world we live in. People get attacked for wearing certain shirts. People who marched in Selma took a stand, got beat up. Throughout history, you take a stand for something, there's a good chance someone is going to see you as an enemy and think the world would be better off if I could get rid of you now. And the problem is, sometimes we laud the people who make those choices. And then it becomes very confusing. Think about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. People are lifted up as this saint all the time, who was participating in a plot to assassinate Hitler. Or we have movies about Operation Valkyrie, and we think, hey, these people were these great heroes trying to assassinate this bad person. But what happens when we start thinking, oh, maybe I should be that hero because this person is bad, or this person could cause damage, and we take it upon ourselves? Unfortunately, both left and right try to lift up Bonhoeffer as this great example without reading the larger piece, because Bonhoeffer really struggled with all this. He's like, I don't know if this is right or wrong. He didn't have certainty. And the problem is we often have certainty about who is right and who is wrong, who is bad, who is good. We'll talk more about Bonhoeffer this summer and some of that struggle in defining evil. But people more and more want to take it upon themselves to be the hero and take out the people who they think are making the world worse. And that happens through violence, but also happens through politics, saying, let's not allow these voices. Let's not allow these voices. Let's shut down this group. Let's shut down that group. And administrations on both sides have been trying to do that and kind of circle the wagons and consolidate their own power by excluding and silencing all these different kinds of groups. Because we're afraid of what the other side says and what the other side thinks. And that becomes dangerous. And over time, it becomes more and more dangerous. And we're seeing that now more than we have in the last 5-10 years, because it's been building and building. So Kirk's legacy, imprint on conservatism is indelible. He provided a bridge from the Tea Party era to the Trump era. He helped bring tons and tons of college students into the conservative ideological fold. But his legacy will also be marred by his embrace of misinformation and his role in radicalizing segments of the conservative movement. His critics will argue that his influence deepened polarization and eroded democratic norms, where his supporters will say he helped bridge those gaps and provide space to have open dialogue and communication. So you're going to have two different viewpoints on that. And again, you have to look and decide what was his words helpful or ultimately hurtful. But Becker, his friend, warned of this very danger. We are manifesting this evil. We're telling each other, this person's a Nazi, this person's an extremist, therefore they must go. And the more we do that, the more people are going to get killed. Our country is not going down a good path. Even Kirk kind of said, if we keep having these, he said, when people stop talking, that's when you get violence. Kirk was right about that. When we stop really talking to each other, we decide the best way to move forward is violence. And we've seen that with killings of Democratic state representatives in Minnesota, with the assassination of Kirk, around the world, just arresting political opponents, assassinating political opponents in Russia, all over the world. We're getting more and more of this. Let's not talk. Let's just wipe out. And I think no matter what you think of Kirk's policies and speech and everything, his life is that kind of warning point, this canary in the coal mine of, we can't keep going down this path. Because it's either going to get a lot worse or it's going to have to get better. And to get better, we have to do a better job of holding ourselves accountable and having real communal dialogue. Which is why we have things like curious conversations to just listen. At Rotary on Monday, somebody from Better Angels is coming, and their whole thing is just talking with people who you disagree with. You don't have to end up agreeing, but can you understand where people are coming from? Listening to why Charlie Kirk made an important impact on my life, and I saw goodness in him. And people are like, I hadn't thought about it that way. And on the flip side, Charlie Kirk really hurt who I am as a person, made me doubt that I could be loved by anyone. And somebody say, okay, let me be able to hear that. That there are multiple sides and experiences to try to understand. And that doesn't mean every opinion is equally valid, but every opinion can help us understand where people are coming from. But it gets complicated and it's hard. So I have another sheet if you want to, because a lot of things come down to who you trust, right? What news sources you look at, who you trust, because most of us aren't going to watch every single Charlie Kirk speech. Most of us aren't going to listen to every single thing that William Barber says on the left or anything like that. We kind of get places we trust. I have this thing, if people want to read it. I work with a group called Global Immersion. I did some of my sabbatical training 5 years ago with them. They work with the Coromila community, Iona, all these peacemaking groups around the world. They're U.S.-based, called Global Immersion. I'm a Global Immersion Peace Fellow now, doing trainings with them periodically. The head of that is a guy named Jerry Swaggart. He has very fancy hair that's always standing up. But he's been around the world in these conflict zones and trying to write from a message of peace. So he wrote kind of a think piece on Charlie Kirk, martyrdom, and our religion of power. He doesn't kind of shy away from what he thinks of Charlie Kirk's vision of Christianity, but then later kind of goes into how both left and right are kind of leaning into these religions of power and creating these martyrs that often aren't healthy, and how as a people we have to do a better job of trying to reunify. So if you want to read that, you can. I agree with stuff he says sometimes. I disagree with stuff he says sometimes. But if you want a perspective on that, you can read that. Take it for yourself. The larger kind of questions that we have that people ask, even at 8 o'clock, is it's tough. Somebody said, what about all the people Charlie Kirk has brought to Christ who didn't know Christ before? And that can be a really good and powerful thing, right? People thinking about faith. People thinking about religion, going to a funeral, hearing about Jesus Christ, hearing about forgiveness and love. That can be a really good and powerful thing. On the flip side, always keeping in mind this difficult idea of there's different versions of Christianity. If you had an alien come down and look at all the different branches of Christianity, you took out the name Jesus or any kind of moniker and just what they believed and how they acted, that alien would not think we all worship the same God. I often say what's important is the character and nature of the God you worship. So that's up to all of us to decide in reading scriptures and learning what is the character and nature of the God I worship. Is it enough just to worship Jesus? What's the Jesus? Who is the Jesus you follow? How does that affect your life? Because there are Jesus followers who have done horrible things in the world. And there are Jesus followers who have done great things. And so always this kind of thinking, I always say it's not enough to just say, I follow Jesus. Well, what does that actually look like? On the flip side, you can say, I follow religion QRXTUV. But maybe the way you do that looks a whole lot like following Jesus than some Christians. I read this book called Blue Like Jazz. The author, Donald Miller, kind of says, at this one very kind of liberal kind of pagan college, he said that people who didn't go to church are the ones who lived most like Jesus to me. And it shook his faith. And so those are always things to consider as well. So it's complicated. That's always encourage you to kind of look. If you find a quote that seems like, that's bad, go look for the actual context. It may not be as bad as you think in that context. It may be worse than you think. I don't know. That's for Charlie Kirk. It's for anybody else that we think this person's a danger to America because they represent woke culture. They represent MAGA culture. Whatever it is, let's get past the overgeneralizations, the stereotypes, and try to understand each other a bit more. And that's what we hope to do here with different timely topics and curious conversations, that I'm not here to find something as good or bad. I can't speak to politics. I'm not classically trained on it. I can read some stuff and provide some information, but I'm not going to get up here and say, this is what foreign policy should look like. Because do I know what I'm talking about? Nope. We don't want me directing foreign policy. I hope I can speak with some authority on matters of Christianity in the Bible, but I may not be right. I told somebody, here's the reality. Charlie Kirk may be closer to the truth of who God is than I am. I may be closer to the truth about who God is than Charlie Kirk is. Or it may be we are equally wrong, just on opposite ways. Because none of us are fully right when it comes to who Jesus is, who God is, and who God wants us to be. So trying to enter that with some humility. We want to have our faith. We want to have our convictions. Charlie Kirk had his convictions. He lived his convictions. Kudos. You may have very different convictions. But if you can live it and be able to back up, here is what I believe my faith says, and you're doing the best you can, it may look very differently, can we try to respect that, even if at times we may try to work against that? Because there may be some Christians say, hey, the Christian thing to do is A. And others says Christian thing to do is B. And A thinks B is the most antithetical Christian thing. And B thinks A is the most antithetical Christian thing. You can try to work against each other, but not dehumanize and hurt each other. And try to understand why B is so important and why A is so important. And get there. We might always disagree, but can we do so in the way of love? Because Jesus, I think, will still have us hold relationships above beliefs. And never did Jesus want to hold so much of an idea about God up that he would hurt others over it. All right, thank you all very much. That was long. I got to go do premarital counseling now, so I can't be late.